Hello, and thanks for joining us for this Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist David Percy. Up first here in the hazardous warning graphics, no advisories, watches, or warnings out for southern Alaska, the Panhandle, Kodiak Island, or the Alaska Peninsula, as well as anywhere in the northern interior. Conditions pretty benign now, with definite distinct lack of storming, especially out over the Bering Sea, where high pressure is more or less dominating the weather pattern out there for the next couple of days. So moving on to satellite imagery, can see low there pulling north and then northwestward off the southeast coast. That brought winds gusting anywhere from 40 to 45 miles an hour at the normally windier areas of the coast today, with rain as the front pushed inland earlier, and that's become more showery during the afternoon hours. Front moving into Canada, breaking up, and the northern portion of the front kind of stalling out there from Yakutat across the Lincoln Glacier Bay area. Then you can see a few bands of clouds across southern Alaska from the western Alaska Range, another one there across the Talkeetnas from the upper Tanana Valley down across the Talkeetnas and on down across Turnagain Arm to Resurrection Bay, and yet another one there over the southeastern Copper River Basin down into the Valdez area. And gusty winds and cold air continue to push southward. The bulk of the cold air now passing across the Alaska Peninsula. So winds lightening up to the north now, but a lot of clear skies pushing down from the north into the Pribilof Islands there and along the southwest coast. Into the western interior today, a weak, narrow band of moisture there along the western Arctic coast down across Kotzebue, Seward Peninsula, and toward Nome, St. Matthew Island there, and then some more mostly mid and high level moisture out over the western Aleutians, and a very weak frontal boundary there crossing the Komodorski. So really no big storms on the chart here at all. As we move to today's map, we'll see there's a rather large 990 millibar low there that pulled northwestward off the coast, and of course the front pushing inland and weakening, and rain changing to showers over the Panhandle today. Just a few isolated snow showers over the northwestern west central Alaska Range, a little bit more widespread perhaps along the eastern Alaska Range there, but amounts quite light. Gusty north winds up to 35 gusts 50 miles an hour across the Alaska Peninsula today, with snow showers pretty numerous along the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, and then a few scattered showers around Kodiak Island, some clearing there for the Fox Islands, with some isolated shower activity there, as well as in the central Aleutians with the remnants of that weak front there. And then you can see another system down to the south that won't move much, with high pressure over the northwest Bering Sea holding, and sunshine over the western interior today. Again, a fair amount of sunshine, clear skies there with those gusty north winds, Togiak Bay in toward Bristol Bay, and again the strongest winds across the Alaska Peninsula. And a few snow flurries there for the eastern Arctic coast down into the eastern North Slope, and very isolated, widely scattered snow showers over the eastern Alaska Range. For tonight, still a chance of some light flurries and snow showers there for the Arctic coast, maybe some fog as well for the eastern Arctic coast. And snow showers possible, light snow showers into the Brooks Range. And even over the eastern interior, skies will stay cloudy or mostly cloudy, with areas of possible snow shower activity for the Alaska Range and the eastern interior areas. Weak trough swinging westward there, bring a chance of rain and snow showers into Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, and possibly into Turnagain Arm up to the western Copper River Basin. Showers on the decrease over the Panhandle, and winds on the decrease over the Alaska Peninsula, along with the snow shower activity. Strong high pressure out over the central Bering Sea, holding frontal systems back to the west and keeping that one down to the south, but still enough leftover moisture for a chance of snow shower or rain and snow showers for the eastern or for the Aleutians. Otherwise, mostly dry conditions out that way. And for Sunday, Again, driest conditions with the clearest skies will be over the central eastern Bering Sea into the western interior areas, south of the Brooks Range. North of the Brooks Range, mostly cloudy skies, chance of snow showers or flurries with possible areas of fog, but nothing too terrible up there. Mostly marginal VFR, maybe some patchy areas of IFR. Otherwise, that extends down into the eastern Brooks Range. Chance of snow showers over the eastern interior, chance of scattered snow showers over the Kenai Peninsula, mountainous terrain of the Copper River Basin, maybe the western Alaska Range, and chance of rain possibly over the southern southeast coast with mostly dry conditions for the northern Panhandle as well as the North Gulf Coast. Still breezy conditions for the Alaska Peninsula, but the winds down from what they were today, and pretty dry for the Kodiak Island area, although a little bit of moisture sits along the west coast there just for a chance of a light shower or two during the day, throughout the day Sunday. And then for Monday, you can see still that same pattern. The best chance of some light precipitation is over the eastern interior from the Arctic coast down into the Alaska Range. Otherwise, variably cloudy skies, maybe some sun breaks for Cook Inlet, Mananuska-Susitna Valley, Kenai Peninsula. Better chance for sun, Kodiak Island. Same thing for Prince William Sound. Scattered showers for the southeast coast, scattered light showers. And high pressure shifting eastward there, just north of the Pribilof, southwest of Nunivak Island, for light winds across much of the eastern Bering Sea, light winds for the eastern Aleutians. Alaska Peninsula, western interior, looking at a fair amount of sun for the Kuskokwim Valley westward and northwestward there up into the Chukchi Sea. And a weak front brings a chance of rain, mostly to Adak, and that'll extend westward to Shemya and Attu. As that high keeps that front out to the west, directs it on up into the Russian Far East. Lows tonight, 35 to 40 for the Panhandle, mid-20s, Copper River Basin, Susitna Valley, lower 30s for the Mananuska Valley and the Kenai Peninsula. And 5 to 15, Kuskokwim Valley, 15 to 20, Bristol Bay, and mid-30s for Kodiak Island. Highs tomorrow, upper 30s to mid-40s, South Central Alaska, Copper River Basin, and 45 to 52 for the Panhandle, in the 20s west of the Alaska Range, followed by lows 5 to 10 for the Kuskokwim Valley, 10 to 15 for the Bristol Bay area, in the 20s elsewhere, except the Panhandle, lows in the mid to upper 30s. Highs 45 to 50 for the southeast coast on Monday, 30s and 40s for the areas east and south of the Alaska Range, otherwise 20s to the west of the mountains. Up to the north, 5 to 15 for your lows over the east central interior, below zero though out toward the Bering Strait and up to the Arctic coast. Highs tomorrow, 30 to 35 around the Fairbanks area, and mid to upper 30s from Northway up toward Eagle, and mid-teens for the Nome area. Still a little below zero for the central and western Arctic coast. Lows 5 to 15 below up that way for Monday morning, otherwise in the teens over the eastern interior, followed by highs in the 20s to mid-30s over the eastern part of the state, and lows in the 30s, upper 20s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And moving on to flying weather, we've got pretty good conditions there, as you can see, over most of the Bering Sea. Pick up some marginal VFR from Atka Island or so westward, and then some IFR just west of Shemya and Attu. Otherwise, some marginal VFR around St. Lawrence Island, but good VFR into the interior. Some IFR there along the west central Alaska Range and over the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country northward to Eagle and along a portion of the Yukon River there. And then some more IFR, Brooks Range to the eastern Arctic coast, Panhandle, VFR, South Central Alaska, Kodiak Island, VFR. And for the afternoon, Sunday, we'll see that we've got just a small area of IFR for the eastern Brooks Range and just about nothing out to the west, just some marginal VFR from Adak to Shemya and Attu and over the west-southwest Bering. North and eastern Bering Sea, including the Pribilofs and the eastern Aleutians, VFR, and that extends well into the western interior and across Bristol Bay, most of Kodiak Island. Some marginal VFR there around Cape Chiniak up to, say, Fognak Island, the Barrens, and maybe some of that spilling into the Kachemak Bay area, southern Kenai Peninsula. But pretty good conditions overall with a lot of VFR south of the Alaska Range and the Panhandle. And for the day on Monday, IFR, again, Eastern Brooks Range and over the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, and then some areas of marginal VFR, mostly north of the Alaska Range over the eastern half of the state, but covering the North Slope and Arctic coast. Southeast coast, mostly VFR. Aleutians, marginal VFR from Adak to Shimianatu, marginal for the Pribilofs, and for Monday afternoon. Some more IFR pushing into the far western Aleutians, otherwise just some lingering marginal VFR around the Pribilofs. And from Matka and Adak to Kiska Island, marginal VFR, but the eastern Aleutians VFR right on up across all of southern Alaska, the Gulf, into the Panhandle. Still that area of marginal VFR, very persistent there over the eastern interior north of the Alaska Range. For passes, Zanatuvik, marginal VFR for the day Sunday, mostly marginal for Adigan. Lake Clark and Merrill, occasional marginal VFR, which means could be VFR at other times, especially into the afternoon. And for Rainy, same thing, chance of marginal VFR and chance of VFR at other times in the day. Windy, marginal VFR, lowest conditions on the northern entrance, and even more so on Isabel, IFR possible on the northern approach, otherwise marginal. And that same forecast good for Mentasta as well. And for Tanita, marginal VFR. And Portage looks pretty marginal for tomorrow, as does Chilkoot and White. And from there, moving on to the freezing levels. We've got some warmer air pushed up over the Komondorskis to Shimianatu, 2,000 to 4,000 feet out that way. Otherwise, 2,000 feet well south of the Queen Charlottes down to Vancouver Island, and not quite reaching the central Aleutian areas. And from there, we'll go to icing. And some icing of the isolated moderate variety possible for the southern southeast coast tomorrow. And also some areas of possible icing there of the light, isolated, light, probably just light, moderate at most, very isolated, and up over the eastern interior to maybe the western Alaska Range, and then most of the moisture out to the west there staying south of the Aleutians, may nudge up toward Adak, but nothing significant at all. And for the jet stream, we've got at 33,000 feet and upper trough still persisting across mainland Alaska. That's putting a 90-knot jet along the southwest coast to the Alaska Peninsula, with 90 knots also forecast for Unalaska Island. And southeast 70 knots east of the Panhandle there in Canada, north 70 for the western Aleutians. And at 9,000 feet, we've got north winds picking up to 40 knots around Nunivak Island and the Yukon Delta coast, mostly over the eastern Bering Sea there, and even stronger across the Alaska Peninsula, 55 knots there. And for the Panhandle, most of the strongest winds staying over Dixon Entrance and down over the Queen Charlottes. That same pattern, 3,000 feet. So light winds for the southeast coast, North Gulf Coast, as well as the interior. North up to 45 across the Alaska Peninsula, maybe 30 to 35 knot northerlies for the Seward Peninsula. And moving on to turbulence. Look for some considerable moderate turbulence there, southern Kuskokwim Valley and the mountainous terrain of northern Bristol Bay, and along the Alaska Peninsula and from Sitkinak Island out across the most of the Alaska Peninsula as well.
When you think of a national park, you probably envision wide open natural spaces, undisturbed by human activity. There are indeed such places, but even in some of the most remote areas of a place like Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska, the mark of man is present. Marine debris is a menace to the farthest reaches of our globe, and even designated national park lands are not immune. In the summer of 2009, the Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance, a grassroots conservation organization based in Seward, Alaska, decided to do something about the marine debris fouling the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park. Marine debris coordinator Tim Johnson had first-hand experience with the issue.
The summer before, my wife and I, Michelle, had done a paddle from Seward, sea kayak paddle from Seward to Homer. Really, our eyes were open to some areas that we didn't realize there was so much accumulation. was very deceiving up front. You couldn't really get a feel for the extent and impact of it. You've got this nice high tide line that's quite pristine, and you really don't get a picture for the impact, the amount of debris in that area until you get behind those storm berms. You get back into the lagoons and the vegetation around those lagoons. And then you see the absolute extent back into that veg and how intertwined and enmeshed these decades of trash deposition. So we were just appalled by that and said we got to get something together on a larger scale.
The Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance is a local nonprofit community organization, and they have been instrumental in helping the Park Service obtain funding to get larger boats to help move the debris, and they get volunteer labor and organize the work trips. And so it's really a partnership between the Park Service and the community to help get out and really get a project done that in and of itself any one group couldn't do on their own.
Most of that trash was baggable. However, there were large items, huge, piles of hauser line, for example, that we just had to hoist up onto the boat.
The volunteers didn't just bag, haul, and hoist the garbage, but also carefully recorded what types of debris were collected.
In many ways, the debris itself is a resource. Archaeologists use middens, the trash heaps, as a way of analyzing past cultures. And in one sense, marine debris is a form of a midden. It's a trash heap that left for the future would be something that people could use to analyze our culture. It may not say the best things about our culture or everything that we want, but we need to be able to document what we've done so that we can preserve that legacy, make sure that we as a society don't forget what we've been doing.
We had two larger categories of marine debris that we picked up. Commercial fishing means like, say, gill nets, large hauser lines, anything that would be associated with more of a commercial fishing scale. And then the second category was more recreational fishing and household, which would be general plastics, things like that. So we had about a 75% of the commercial fishing marine debris element, and about 25% of the recreational and household further out the bay. And we had the exact opposite the closer we got to Seward. Within the bay, it was about 25% commercial fishing versus 75% recreational fishing and household.
The trash is not just unsightly for park visitors, but also poses threats to wildlife and marine habitat.
Really one of the larger issues now that you go to this plastic that can really get into the food web and affect the food web differently than something like glass.
These substances, for instance, all these polystyrene blocks that are breaking down into all these little crumbly bits are further breaking down on a microscopic level, and how much of an impact that has, in this ecosystem is yet to be determined, but I think it's got pretty high potential.
Well known that sea turtles will eat plastic bags floating in the water. They look like jellyfish to a sea turtle, and obviously a plastic bag doesn't go well in the digestive system of a turtle. Albatross will see small pieces of plastic floating on the surface and think they're small fish and other food sources, and eat that in their stomachs, especially in some of the northwestern Hawaiian islands. They'll find dead albatross that have starved to death with a full stomach, and it's full of pieces of plastic.
We're affecting our local areas this way, but we need to be thinking about it from more of a state and global, international scale. And most importantly, to try and focus on prevention of it coming in the first place. Because we're just going to see this continuing, to build up on our beaches unless we're able to get a little bit more of an approach on prevention on the front end.
Marine debris is really a global problem, in all the oceans, and there are many different sources. Global shipping is one. Fishing debris from commercial fishing, recreational boating activity on land, stuff blowing off land, washing down streams, people just throwing stuff on the shore.
Though the problem can seem overwhelming, Johnson remains upbeat about making a positive difference.
No, you gotta start locally. You gotta take control of what you can do, and make something with that, and try and move on from there.
Overall, more than 9 tons of debris was removed from the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park and transported back to Seward to be deposited in a landfill.
People gave a lot to the project in order to make it happen. That was awesome. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. Being able to put that large of a group of volunteers together, dedicated volunteers to put that much effort and give that much time and pull all the different agencies together to see it all happen was incredible. It was incredible. Yeah, it was very fulfilling experience.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Moving on to coastal water forecasts for the south coast there. East winds 15 to 20 knots. For the north coast, east winds 10 to 15 knots. And pretty light winds over the inner channels for Lynn Canal, northeast at 10 knots. Stevens Passage, northeast at 10. And Clarence Strait, winds are southeast at 15 knots. And for the day on Monday, south coast winds have kicked up there a little bit. Small craft advisories for south winds at 25 knots, seas building to 10 feet. And on the north coast, the central coast, northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, and north to northwest breezes at 10 knots for the north coast. For Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage, winds mostly north at 10 knots with slight seas, and for Clarence Strait, southeast winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. Prince William Sound for Sunday, northeast winds at 10 knots with 2-foot seas, and east-northeast winds at about 20 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Western North Gulf Coast, northeast at 20 knots. Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds at 10 to 15 knots. And for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay, winds northwest 30 knots, seas 8 to 10 feet. And for Monday, north winds 15 to 20 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas. Gale warnings for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Winds northwest 35 knots with 10-foot seas. And for the North Gulf Coast, northerly winds 20 knots with 4-foot seas. And Prince William Sound about the same. Winds a little lighter, though, at about 15 knots from the north. Kodiak Island, north to northwest winds on Sunday, 25 knots. Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisories, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. And for Bristol Bay, northwest winds 20 knots. For Monday, for the Alaska Peninsula, mostly north winds at 15 to 20 knots, and for Bristol Bay, northwest winds at 15 knots. Kodiak Island, northwest winds at 30 knots with 6 to 7 foot seas. For the eastern Aleutians, north to northeast winds 15 to 30 knots for Sunday. Central Aleutians east 20 to 25 knots. For the western Aleutians, east winds 20 to 30 knots with 8 to 13-foot seas. And for Monday, for the western Aleutians, east-southeast winds 30 to 35 knots, AKwx looking at an east wind on Monday of 30 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, northeast winds 15 to 25 knots, 4 to 9-foot seas. For the southwest coast on Sunday, northwest winds 15 to 25 knots. Pribilof Islands, north at 15, St. Matthew Island, northwest winds at 15 knots, northwest winds 15 knots also for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. And for Monday, even lighter winds up that way for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island, as well as the Yukon Delta coast, all forecasting northwest winds at 10 knots. And for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, north winds at 15 knots, light variable winds for the Pribilofs with 4-foot seas, but small craft advisories for St. Matthew Island with south winds at 25 knots and seas at around 6 feet. Up along the Arctic coast for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, we've got north to northwest winds 5 to 10 knots and light northerly winds at 10 knots for the central coast, west side, northwest, 5 knots. For the Chukchi Sea, north to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots. And for Monday, for the Chukchi Sea, north to northwesterlies down to 10 knots. Really light winds on the western and central Arctic coast, west at 5 knots. And west-northwest breeze at 10 to 15 knots there for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline. And for tonight, still a chance of some flurries and snow showers for the eastern North Slope Arctic coast into the Brooks Range. And that same sort of pattern also existing over much of the eastern interior, just some scattered snow showers over the western Alaska Range. Rain and snow showers over the North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound there, possibly into the Copper River Basin, and drying out over the Panhandle, but still a chance of some moisture. And for the day on Sunday, tomorrow, we've got not too bad for the southeast coast. Still a chance of rain over the southern areas, but just isolated showers elsewhere. And some isolated snow showers over the mountainous terrain of the Kenai Peninsula into the Copper River Basin, as well as the western Alaska Range. And then chance of snow showers over the central and eastern interior to the Arctic coast, but sunshine over the western interior and much of the Bering Sea with diminishing winds. And then a little bit tighter gradient brings those gales into the southern or Kamishak Bay area and the Barren Islands. Otherwise, still a chance of very light snow for the eastern interior, chance of rain and snow showers for the Panhandle, sunny and dry for the central and eastern Bering Sea into the interior.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.